Ken O'Sullivan is an Irish underwater cinematographer, filmmaker, author, diver, and swimmer. As well as completing documentary series for RTE, Ken was cameraman on BBC's Atlantic Wildest Ocean on Earth series, a CBC Canada documentary on jellyfish, and ITV's Britain's Whales and Britain's Sharks documentary. His series on the North Atlantic, The Dark Ocean, was hugely popular when it was shown on RTE last year. It revealed never-before filmed behaviours of our stunning marine creatures with an original soundtrack performed by the RTE Concert Orchestra. Ken has also made a 10-minute movie on West Cork elite swimmer Steve Redmond. He recently spoke to me from his home in Lahinch, County Clare, not far from where he grew up. So Ken, thank you for joining us here today on the podcast. So tell me a little bit about your path to the water, as it were, and how you got interested in water, because I know that you grew up in the middle of Ennis, which I think Ballyala Lake is the closest to water that is, and it's a good distance then to the sea. So how did you get interested in the sea?
Well, my mother told me I was born dehydrated. She said I was all dishevelled because her poor woman, her waters had broken. So I put my craving for water down to that. But
Very good, maybe.
I grew up in Ennis. Yeah, no, you're not quite correct, no, Siobhan, because we used to swim in a river called the Turret, which was over near the Bishop's house. And it was a kind of a pool in the river. God, let's say you wouldn't go near it now because of all the houses. But yeah, it was low. I mean, we craved it, and we were blessed in Ennis to have a swimming pool. So I learned to swim there at a young enough age. And, only in time did I realize, meeting people, that, we were very lucky that many people didn't have access to that. There was lots of people my age who couldn't swim, but a lot of people getting into it now. My connection with the sea is from my father's side of the family. He came from a place called Fenit Island. It's quite little known, but it's a small island on the north side of Tralee Bay. And our family had lived there since 1750 as small farmers and fishermen. And my dad was a third son, so he was certainly never going to make a living out of fishing and not out of farming. So he left to become a radio officer and worked in Ballygreen with your dad for many years, coincidentally. And I spent the summers of my youth there on Fenit with my dad fishing, and he was a lot older than me. And when he was coming to retirement age, he was kind of going back doing the things that he had done with his father, which was kind of fishing in the very old school methods with trammel nets and hand lines and spiller lines. So I was the family labor that was available for free. So I accompanied him, but yeah, I loved it. It was a Huckleberry Finn kind of existence.
It sounds absolutely idyllic. So tell me then, how did you go from that into the underwater world, let's say? Now, I know you took a kind of circuitous route, because I know you went to London and you did, I know you were in New York and you were driving a truck. And I know, so it took you a few hop, steps and jumps to get to where you are today and the career you have today. So just talk us through some of that strange journey.
Uh, Life's too short for one career. Oh my God, I'm on my third or fourth. So yeah, I studied electronics in college to be electronics technician in what's now called LIT. In my day, it was just a bunch of prefabs called Moilish. But I played in bands since I was 16. We had a great music scene in Ennis, lots of great rock bands and mentors. And so I wanted to be a musician and live a creative life. And so literally a week after I finished college, I went to New York to be the next U2, which clearly, as we all know, happened. And of course, we were all illegal in those days. And so I drove a truck, moved furniture for a year and a half. I swept streets. I worked as a lumberjack in Connecticut. And anyway, after 2.5 years, it didn't work out. And we got a gig in a place called CBGB's, actually, which was a big kind of a rock venue at the time. And that was to be our big break. And the Tuesday before the gig, our drummer disappeared. This Colombian man, lovely man, and we never heard from him again. Yeah, so kind of took the steam out of everything. So I moved to London to get a real job using my education. So I worked in computing for many years, and actually spent 7 years on trading floors, running around managing trading systems for market traders and equity brokers. So it was I thought it was a great job at the time. It was a great job. It was ferociously hard work. Anyway, moved on a bit, and I learned to dive in Australia in the late 90s, and it was just a very magical, kind of profound moment for me when you drop through that membrane, if you like, that separates air from water into this three-dimensional world. And my father used to talk about, when he was a kid, diving down on Phoenix Island into, reefs and massive pollock and lobsters and crabs. But of course, the truth is he didn't, because, they didn't have masks and snorkels, and they certainly didn't have wetsuits. So I think it was an aspirational dream world. So I felt very privileged to be the first of my family to see this underwater world that, had sustained us for hundreds of years, because my father always said, without the sea, we wouldn't have survived the famine. And like a lot of coastal folk, you'll see this a lot in Donegal, Connemara, West Cork, West Kerry. They're very connected to their ancestors. It's almost like their ancestors are in the present. My father showed me this huge skillet pot, and it was broken at this stage, but he said that his grandmother, during the height of the famine, they used to kill a lamb once a week and bake a big stew, and people from the mainland would come and she'd feed them. And they were able to, one of the things was that I believe they didn't get blight on Phoenix Island. I know it's documented that they didn't on the Mahari's Islands, which are south, and blight comes on the wind, and you would need a very strong easterly wind in June when potatoes are in flower. So they didn't, without digressing too much, but they were able to feed themselves from seasonal fish. Lovely man in Feen at Paul Moriarty told me that my Uncle Jack was the last man in North Kerry to salt fish. So they would salt fish for the winter. Probably wrasse, which Osquailge, or colloquially we know as bollocks. Down there they call them Connor fish. And they helped them to survive. So for me to then discover the underwater world, there was very strong emotional connection in that regard. And yeah, so I came back and moved back to Ireland in the early years of the millennium, and I had my three beautiful daughters, and started to mostly snorkel, some diving on the shallows of the coast, and just saw this beautiful underwater world with incredible color and vibrancy and life. And I just felt a kind of a compulsion to document it. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy a camera, and can't be that hard to film underwater. So anyway, yeah, so
What
that's
you thought?
which I thought. Should I make a documentary? That can't be that hard. Anyway, yeah, it was like an hallucinogenic kind of a world, obviously without the narcotics. And other than the great Eamon de Butler and Gerd van Gelderen, nobody had really documented it up to that point, not in any substantive way. And so I fell in love with it, and I can't really say the rest is history, because it's been a ferociously difficult career to learn the craft of visual storytelling and camera work, and then to learn the craft of documentary filmmaking and storytelling. But they're easy compared to getting your projects funded, and yeah, that's the tough part.
And tell me, because my memories of underwater storytelling, I suppose, the likes of Jacques Cousteau, who a lot of people now wouldn't remember. So I mean, do you remember him growing up, or who was it that you went to when you were kind of first?
Yeah, Cousteau is a huge influence. Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, absolutely. Obviously, he wasn't doing stuff in Ireland, but he did dive in Kilkee. As I often say, we don't need foreign people to tell us how beautiful our waters are, but he did say it was some of the best diving in the world in Kilkee and West Clare, which it is. Yeah, Cousteau was a huge influence, and he was the first. I mean, he wasn't just an underwater cameraman. I mean, he invented scuba. Him and another guy, they developed the dive regulator from small gas cooker. So he was a real pioneer and a real innovator, and deserves all the credit for that. So yeah, that was a huge thing for me. But I mean, there wasn't anyone who had done substantive underwater camera work in Ireland when I started. So I was kind of exploring it and just making it up as I was going along and teaching myself. So it's been a journey in that regard, yeah.
It has, but Ken, it's a hugely expensive, well, first of all, pastime, but also a career. And you touched on it there when you talked about getting the funding. I mean, is there a hunger or an appetite? Not obviously there is to watch these programs, but to actually fund them. And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there was almost no documentaries made about natural history in Ireland for 20 years, after Eamon de Beauclair and Gerrit van Gelderen stopped, actively, they did bits and pieces. There was really nothing for 20 years. So we really had to push broadcasters in Ireland to get them to be interested in it. And I suppose, the underwater world, there's such a unique aesthetic to it. And because nobody had seen it, when our first documentary came out in TG Carr, the newspapers loved it. We got 2 pages in the Irish Independent because nobody had seen these visuals before, and they were colourful and they were local, and that's why all of my work is in Ireland. This is where I want to tell stories from. So, is there an appetite? I think there is. Is there an appetite for funding? I mean, we're lucky. People are giving out about the TV license, but that's what pays for this stuff. That's what pays for most of our documentaries, and it's public service broadcasting. And I donated all my work to the educational curriculum a few years ago, and it was the first of many documentaries to follow. And the idea was to reuse documentaries that were paid for with public money within education. And I was absolutely delighted to do it. And we're talking to the people with the Leaving Cert curriculum now because they're revising elements of that. So I think there's an appetite, but it's really difficult. And we compete with, the Blue Planets, and they spend millions per episode, which we don't have. And it's very difficult to film underwater in Ireland. So, but I'm not complaining for a second. I've made my peace with all that. And I feel very privileged to do what I do.
Well, I suppose your unique selling point is what you said there about it being local, and because nobody else is really doing it around Ireland, you have carved a little bit of a niche for yourself. And I know Ireland's Deep Atlantic in 2018, and then you went on to the North Atlantic, the Dark Ocean in 2023, which I think really was absolutely swallowed up by everybody, because I think that came post-pandemic, and it was a lovely, I suppose, juxtaposition with what we'd gone through to be able to see this beautiful world. And it also dawned on me when you mentioned there about working on trading floors. Do you think there's something in the fact that when you go underwater, and I think all of us swimmers realize that too, it is really like entering another world, and it's almost a silent world where within seconds you can forget you were ever on land. And do you think that somehow you were drawn to that because of maybe the chaos and the noise of your previous career?
Um, yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. When I was working in London and City, look, back in those days, it was, you're probably too young to remember the 1980s and early 90s, but it was get a job,
I
get a
wish I
job.
was too young, but I remember it
Well,
very well.
unemployment was massive. It was get a job, and if you had a job, there was no, oh, I'd like to do this for a living, or but anyway, so it was only in later times, when I had wherewithal, I managed to get into this career. But in terms of when you drop in to the ocean and the underwater world, of course, absolutely, it's beautiful, and you switch off immediately. It's as I've always said, it's as good for your mind, it's as good for your head as it is for your body, and you lose yourself. I find that I do when my mind wanders, and it can take a little while. Um, but in terms of this, the silent word is a slight, I don't know what the word is for it. So Cousteau famously called it the silent word because, of course, it is, suddenly your senses feel a little bit dull. But of course, noise does travel in water. So it depends on where you are. I've been in the water many times with dolphins and sperm whales, and it's really loud. I've been in the water with boats. I mean, you have no idea how loud boats are, even ferries. It's deafening. We were under the ferry in one of the islands a few years ago. The dive guy got the day wrong. We were down about 15 meters and the ferry came over us. It was deafening to the point where we knew we would die if we came up. But I was considering it because the noise was so it's not quite a silent world, but I think in terms of what you're maybe referring to there, Siobhan, in terms of what it does to your senses, it certainly takes you into a completely different emotional or mental space, absolutely, which is the beauty of it.
You've also done quite a bit of research through your work. You're a bit of a chameleon. It's not just underwater photography. You're branching out into all other kind of connected areas. But I was interested to read that you had done some research into sharks in particular while you were diving. So tell us a little bit about that and what you've discovered.
Well, I suppose the thing about being self-employed is, we don't have resources. I don't have researchers that I can just, go do this. So I do my own research. Now I work with scientific research, as much as anything to ensure factual accuracy. And I have a great guy from Cove there, Dr. Conor Ryan, young guy. He does a lot of research with me. But I mean, for me, that just seems the most natural thing ever to be a storyteller, that you find the stories and they're of interest to me, and then I try to tell them. And, we've contributed a lot to research. We had 6 research papers came out of Ireland's Deep Atlantic, which documented mainly new behaviours by animals. And it's not that I compare myself to anybody, but the BBC only had 3. Yeah, I feel, you have to, if you go to the ocean and you see all of these issues and you're documenting, you've got to tell these stories. And if you can contribute something, then you have to. And, the latest research on sharks is we're killing up to 270 million sharks every year.
We're killing.
Killing 270 million sharks globally every year. There was a Spanish trawler arrested, came into Cork there in 2019. They had the fins of 6,000 blue sharks on board. 6,000. Maybe somebody can explain why. I think the fine was about 10 grand. Sorry. So they cut the fins off, and shark fins are worth more than their weight in gold. So they go to Asia for shark fin soup, which the nouveau riche in China seem to believe cures cancer and male impotence. So I would bet on it.
Well, it's a shocking indictment, really, of humanity, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that brings me to the question: you've been diving now for several years, and do you ever get upset by what you're seeing as regards plastic, rubbish, you know, the fin whale story, and even, dolphins being shot? I mean, I mean, we could talk for hours about what's happening underneath the water, but I mean, does it ever really get to you to the extent that you'd say, I can't go there anymore?
Sure it does. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I've always told conservation stories, and we had to go through serious arguments with commissioning editors to allow it to be in, because up to 5, 6 years ago, natural history, especially the big productions, they didn't. People made documentaries about Ireland. It's like, oh, everything's beautiful. Oh my God, it's beautiful. Look at these mad animals. What about all the damage? What about all the decimation of species? I mean, I've lost track of the statistics about the number of species that are in trouble in the world. It's something like 60% since the last 50 years have either become extinct or are in serious trouble. So yeah, it's very depressing. What can you do? I mean, anyone can have a whinge, especially on social media. You're not doing anything. You're not. So I just try to create education and awareness. That's all I can do, and hope that if people see what's happening, maybe I am an internal optimist, maybe I'm naive, but that if people see what's happening, that we can do something about it. And it takes a long time to make change. It took 5 years for our documentaries to be incorporated in the educational curriculum, and lots of others, and many more followed. Lots of people did a lot of work for 5 years to make that happen. Basking sharks were finally protected in 2022. Lots of people did a lot of work for decades. Me going onto Instagram and Facebook and saying, oh, or standing, sorry, these people who make documentaries and look at the cameras and say, we really need to protect this. Well, what are you doing to help that? So I'm involved in a number of projects. A few years ago, Trilly Bay is a fascinating place because it's full of elasmobranchs. These are sharks, gates, and rays that come in to breed. And I was despondent to see what was happening there, because some of the species are decimated by 97% through fisheries interactions. So about 12, 13 years ago, a couple of guys and we just decided to start this tag array angling competition. Now it's all run by the Trilly Bay Sea Angling Club and Eugene Farley, but we've done it every year to try and tag these rays that are really, really rare and create education and awareness. And there's a big conservation project going on at Marine Institute now to monitor these animals and to try and look at ways that the fisheries can work differently to not kill them, because it's their breeding grounds. And so, yeah, you've got to do something, but doing something empowers you, I suppose. When you're asking me on a personal level, if I get despondent, I do, and angry, I do, but you've got to help. The only way from you is to deal with it, is to try and empower yourself to do something. But also, how can you not do something about these situations when you see them?
I know, but it's like a mammoth task really, and we're, tiny, tiny specks in it. But having said that, do you think we're improving? If you were to go back, say, 20 years when we hadn't, I suppose, as much awareness of what we were doing, do you think we're actually getting any better or any worse?
I think we are, Siobhan. You
Better?
know, I think we are getting better.
Good.
Do you know, the older I get, it's a bit like Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. I think it's this continual battle between good and bad, and you can't give up. You have to do everything you possibly can. It seeps up. One of the problems we have is, there's something phenomenon called shifting baselines. Now that's just a term, but it's whereby people will say, well, how much have things disimproved or changed since I was a kid? And as nature is going down, 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 they remember it at a very low level, whereas their parents and the grandparents remember it at a very different level. You just have to keep doing it. I'm doing my speaking tour at the moment, and I get lots of young people coming in, and I go to schools as much as I can. They get it. Kids get it. It's the lads my age that are going on about, sure about climate change. No, I was told to do this and diesel, and now I'm told to, kids get it. And I have to hope that education awareness is, you got to take the long-term view.
You do, but there's a big gap between getting it and doing anything about it, as you mentioned there a while ago. And that
There
will
is,
be
absolutely there
my
is.
fear. We're great at talking, and the next generation are fantastic at talking and sharing, but actually getting up and moving is going to be a really big task for them. But
Well,
not
it is. And there's one small thing, sorry to cut across you. I mean,
mm,
everybody gives out about data centers now, right? Everybody picks up their phone 20 times a day. What's happening when you're scrolling? Where's all that content coming from? The data center and all the communications infrastructure
here we
between
are.
you and those.
Here we
You know,
are using the juice of the data centers as we speak.
as we speak.
As we maybe take a more positive route, I wanted to ask you about swimming in particular, because I know that you are a big swimmer, apart from a diver and a snorkeler and a cameraman. Um, and I know that you do love your time in the water, even without the camera dragging you down, as it were. So tell me a little bit about the places that you like to swim off the Irish coast, and what do you think are some of the sweet spots?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've been swimming since I was a child. I always loved the water, and I kind of, that brought me in. Just the love of the water brought me into diving and scuba diving, and I've only been swimming, kind of distance swimming, for 7 or 8 years. Managed to hook up with some friends who became very good friends of mine in a swim group. And, in terms of swimming kind of several kilometers and swimming regularly. And yeah, I mean, it's pure therapy. I mean, at one end, if you're going through stuff in your life, it's absolute therapy. At the other end, it's just wonderful to be able to do it, and there's a huge social aspect, as you probably know. I'm not going to tell you where my favorite beach is because I don't want loads of people coming there. But anywhere on the west
We
coast,
just have to follow you and find out.
anywhere on the west coast. But I swim a lot. I spent a lot of time in Phoenix and North Kerry. It's beautiful swim, really well set up there. Kevin Williams, Elaine. Whereas the land, so they've got fantastic setup with the boys that run parallel to the shore, and a lot of swimmers there, but there's lots of space for swimmers. And look, any place on the west coast, Lough, of course, I'm sure you swim there. It's a fantastic spot. West Cork coast. Just talk to locals, get some local knowledge. But it's interesting, Siobhan. I mean, before I started swimming distance, I'd spent a lot of time obviously in the water, and I mean, I've been literally in the middle of the Atlantic, in 3,000 meters of water. And that can be a bit spooky, but I got used to it. There's always a boat around, and I've often been 500-600 meters from the boat and I'm fine. And suddenly when I started swimming 7 or 8 years ago, and you find yourself maybe 400 or 500 meters out, I had to, I really had to work hard not to have panics. Um, and I know that's something that a lot of people have to deal with, and maybe not spoken about enough. But I could have panicked several times, and it took me quite some time to deal with that. And it just goes to show how this is all in the head. So if I'm in the middle of the Atlantic in 3,000 meters of water, and I'm fine because I know there's a boat there, and if I, can get his attention, he'll come to me. Whereas if I'm 200 meters out in 10 meters of water, why would I panic then? So it just goes to show it's in the head. And I found that a wonderful kind of, in terms of personal development and how to deal with stuff in life, that you have to roll with the punches. You've got to go with the flow. And sorry, cliches now, but So swimming really helped me in that regard, just knowing that you breathe and stay calm and look up at the sky if you get in trouble or
And
down under.
what kind of distances do you do, Ken?
So I kind of have a dip in Lahinch in the mornings. I don't go every day. I'm not, beat myself up about it, but I go most days and go when I can, right through the winter. And then we swim longer distances in the evenings with my group. It's mostly, in the winter we're kind of doing anything 500-600 meters, and then in the summer, if I can get my fitness up, yeah, I've done a few kind of 5-6 kilometer swims, and I love it. I'm not one for doing distance for the sake of distance. Like the long swims I've done are swims that have meant something to me. So my grandfather was stranded on a tiny rock island west of Phoenix Island many years ago, and they couldn't swim, of course. My father could swim, and he had one brother, but that was it. Nobody else in their family, even if his siblings could swim, and certainly the previous generation. And they luckily they got rescued. Actually, it's kind of funny because they were smokers. If they weren't smokers, they wouldn't have been rescued. So they had matches, and they gathered up some driftwood and waited for it to get dark and lit a fire, and the lifeboat, somebody saw it. But I think that was 3 miles out. So I'd always been fascinated by that story, and I thought it'd be just a nice kind of a thing to do to swim from there into Phoenix Island. So it was a lovely, everything just went my way. My ancestors were with me, and in spirit, and my cousin John Moore, retired fisherman, and some close friends came with me in the boat, and I swam in, and I just loved it. I loved it. I had wind and tide with me, and a beautiful day, and I swam around Phoenix Island then last year, about 6.5 kilometers. But again, it was something. I'm not into distance for the sake of numbers. It was something I wanted to do, and we're talking about the emotional side. I mean, I lose myself on swims. It's wonderful. A lot of swims I don't remember what was going on. Yeah, it's nice to just think about the things that are going on in your life at the time. Sorry, no. I think about my ancestors and my mother and different things, and think about your children. So yeah, that's the beautiful thing about swimming, is that you can just lose yourself in that regard. And sorry, no.
And tell
So it's
me,
wonderful. It's wonderful. Let your mind go. I was in Belfast
absolutely.
the other day. I saw lovely writing on the wall of Charlie Chaplin. He said, sometimes maybe we think too much and feel too little. So I'm always on, about emotional intelligence, and that we should feel our way through the world.
And
Sorry, no.
on that, you're doing a lovely tour at the minute where you're sharing some of this with the audience. I know you were in West Cork there at the end of last year, and I know you've one coming up in Bray on the 3rd of April. So tell us a little bit about what you do there with that show, Ken.
Yeah, it was a bit of a dream to do a live show, because obviously documentary is it's not an interactive thing. You make a documentary, you put it out on TV. So with the live shows, I kind of talk about my work, and then show videos and give backstories of you know swimming with a blue whale, or discovering the basking sharks in courtship off Clare, which is the first time in the world has been documented. And just giving people insight into that, interacting. Lots of kids come, teenagers, they ask questions. So it's fab, yeah. I had a lovely night. Of course, West Cork is full of sea people, so we had a full house in the Celtic Gross Hotel. That was a really special night, and nearly a full house in the Everyman, 420 people. I couldn't get over it, but so yeah, I have a few shows left. I'm in Kilkenny tomorrow night in the Watergate, and Green on Letterkenny on the 29th of March, and then I did a show in Bray, which of course lots of sea swimmers, really dedicated people, sea swimmers in Bray, and it sold out so quickly that a lot of people couldn't get tickets, so they asked me to do a second one. So April 3rd, I'm going back to the Mermaid, and
Brilliant.
and then I'll be focusing
Appropriate.
on
An
what I should
appropriate
be doing.
name.
Yeah, isn't it? Beautiful theatre. I mean, lots of beautiful theatres on Ireland I was never in before.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll be seeing you around this part of the world soon.
Thanks for having me, Siobhan, and well done on the podcast. Keep it up.
To the Southern Stars from A to C podcast series. This episode was produced and presented by Southern Star editor Siobhan Cronin and edited by Dylan Mangan. This was the 12th episode focusing on sea swimming, so if you enjoyed it, please be sure to check out our other 11 episodes with people like long-distance swimmer Ken O'Shea, 4 of the men behind the iconic Fastnet swim, and the incredible swimming women of Iceland. For more stories like this, visit southernstar.ie/podcasts, where you can swim through previous episodes. And be sure to pick up a copy of this Thursday's newspaper in shops across West Cork, or online via subscribe.southernstar.ie. Please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss any future episodes, and we'll be back again very soon. Thanks for listening.